picked the wrong week to quit sniffing glue.
Oh, look at that. You got another Jack. How lucky you are. How wonderful for you. Now.
Well, good morning. Welcome back. I mean, you haven't gone anywhere. I may have. I had a nice long weekend, and I'm back to working on another kit. And it's a brand new kit. We're starting a new kit on a new week, and this is normally the time where I would pull up the show box and say, here's the kit I'm building. It's nice and it's lovely, but we're in a unique situation this time in that I don't have a show box to show you. Not even on a garage kit. Some garage kits will even make an attempt at giving you a show box or a label on the front to show you what it is. But no, this week we are trying something new. This week, well, it's going to take more than a week, but this project is the first of where I think a lot of the model business is going, and that is into the area of 3D printing. This kit was built or is designed and 3D printed by a buddy of mine named Jack from up in Pittsburgh, and he's been working on this design for quite a while now. It's not a new design, it's the Deadalus design. It is the famous design from classic Trek. It goes all the way back to the preliminary designs of the Enterprise. It is, the old ball and nacelles. You've seen it 100 times. This is the Deadalus kit. And what he's done is he's modeled it in the computer as a learning exercise for his 3D printing. Because it's very, I won't say it's very simple, but it's simple. It's it's spheres and tubes and secondary tubes and things like that. It's basic geometric shapes that, once you've got these down, you can work at putting the details and all that kind of stuff in. So as a learning tool for 3D printing and 3D designing, it's an excellent test case. But that means A, he's got no instructions, and B, he's got no fancy show box for it. So we're going to be just doing this from the ground up. Now, this is the first time I have worked with this PLA material, so I'm probably going to get a lot of things wrong. Forgive me if I do, but it's its own beast as far as the fit's perfect because things are designed to a fragment of a micro inch as far as when they're designed and fit together. But the material itself, the one thing you could say about 3D printing is it leaves striations, and if you look at that, the color of this material plus the striations give it a very almost stainless steel look to it, which of course will all be painted. But this means we've got to start by putting many coats of primer on top of these so as to get rid of or minimize this striation pattern. And also, even though the Deadalus class has many windows, there are no clear inserts provided for this kit. So I'm experimenting with what's going to be the best way. When I made my big Enterprise, I used nail acrylic, and I taped down the outside and sprinkled nail acrylic in the holes and made my windows that way. That's not going to be as feasible getting inside of the back of all of these dimensions to do that. So you can either you can either leave them open and not do a bloody thing with it, which is, okay in some respects. You can put a single clear sheet of acetate in behind it and just have windows with very deep window sills and have, windows behind them. I'm looking at right now the old standby of window canopy glue, trying to fill the holes with that to see if that's going to work. You can also put in a drop of clear epoxy and see how that works. I've done that with the turn signals and headlights on the Fifth Element taxi that I did. I just mixed up some clear epoxy and filled the holes with that. So we're going to see. A lot of this is going to be test bed stuff to see what's going to be the best way to tackle this. Now, many years ago, more years now than I could probably tell you because my memory is going, I built a Deadalus class ship, and it was, and at some point I'm sure I'll bring this out just to show you the two of them side by side. It was the Steve Neal kit. He sculpted his using a lot of the same model parts that Mike Okuda did when he did his Cisco desktop model. The Cisco Deep Space Nine desktop model is kind of the Rosetta Stone for all of this. This is kind of where all of it is originated from. But he used the same type of parts that Okuda did, which is the side thrusters from a, I believe, 1/72nd scale shuttle stack. The middle engine, or the middle fuel tank from the space shuttle was used for the central body. Things like that. Now, the design of the Daedalus is, like I said, it's a well-known thing. And I've built that Daedalus. And I don't want to build another Daedalus because, hey, I've already built it. But what Jack has done is he has provided alternate decals for alternate ships. And I happen to know for a fact that the ship that Jack is building he's building an Archon from Return of the Archons. He's building a much larger version of this with much more detail on it. It's a gorgeous thing to behold. So I'm not going to tread on that. And I've already built a Daedalus, so I'm not going to build another one. I've decided what to do on this kit is I am going to build the Horizon. Now, the Horizon 176 is the ship that contaminated the Ionians in Piece of the Action. So that was the Horizon left the Chicago mob of the 20s book. They left the book when they left. So, and the Ionians patterned their whole civilization on the mobs of the 20s. That's the kit I'm building. So that gives me certain liberties. I'm going to be adding a lighting kit to this. I think I'm going to try something special for the base. Now Jack has sent me many bases, an alternate bases for this. I think what I'd like to do is do a base that kind of looks like the book. So that's going to be its own animal, I think. But as there is not much building to do with this because this kit is so beautifully engineered to go together in very few pieces. My job for today is doing a little bit of cleanup and doing a lot of priming to see what kind of texture I can get rid of. This is kind of a beautiful texture, but it's going to be a distracting texture too. So we're going to try to sand some of that down and then get on with the building. So join me as I enter the world of 3D for the first time. Yes, I've been flat all my life, and today I'm in 3D. Alrighty, here I'm taking this piece here as an example, but I'm trying to fill in the windows with the canopy and window parts maker, just to see how well that's going to go. Now I fully expect to cut vinyl masks to mask all of these windows when time comes to do the actual painting. But for right now, I just want to see what kind of reaction we're getting. The first one closes in the hole. The first, where's my finger? There's my finger. The first coating, or the first time you do it, you close in the hole, and then you add another layer on top, or another drop on top, and then another drop, and you work your way up. I don't know that I'm actually going to try to do, you know, a window where the contour comes all the way out to the very top. I may see if we do a combination, maybe if I can make a drop of the glue, close in the window, and then maybe I can let that dry and then put a drop of the epoxy on top of that and let the epoxy be in the window. I'll have to see. I'm still playing, but you can see there are plenty of little, I would say, where's my pointer? Micro boogers here that need to be cleaned up from the 3D printing process. You can see, again, the many, oops, you can't see it if it's not focused. You can see the many striations here. Each time when this is printing, it's sitting on a bed like this, and the printer goes around and deposits a layer upon layer upon layer until this is built up over many thousands of revolutions and many hours of printing. But that's experiment one. So first thing I need to do is run out and go get some primer, because I seem to be perilously low on primer right now. Okay, welcome back. It's Tuesday, and I'm continuing on the Horizon. And first of all, I want to let you know that these have been drying all night. I put many coats of the sealer on it, and then one coat of filler over top of all of that. And I'm doing a little bit of sanding, try to smooth everything down. But that's not the only solution. This is called XTC 3D. It's a brush-on coating for 3D printed parts. See, I can read just as well as you. And what it's supposed to do is act like a shell that you paint on. It's basically an epoxy you end up painting on top of your 3D parts, and it fills in all the little grooves and evens things out. And I had used that to some success on the first pieces that Jack had sent me just as a trial, and I decided it wasn't something I was going to use on the whole kit, but I did need to use that on the clear bits, or the translucent bits, that which will be the nacelle domes, or the Bassard collector domes, and the dome that goes over the shuttle bay at the back. I can't really paint those. I have to do something to even them out. So I'm going to use the clear stuff on that to see how well it smooths out. But what I've been noticing is that this is a lot more work. I thought it's going to be a lot more work than I thought it was going to be. I've, like I said, put many coats on this, and I've sanded it down, and I'll put many more coats on it to see how much I can minimize this. But the sanding, it's tough because, yes, you want to sand all of that, but you don't want to sand away your raised detail. So finding a good happy medium in all of that is where I am sticking. Because, yeah, I could go over this thing with just a hand sander and a power tool. But if I do that, it might ruin these raised details. So taking that slow and steady. The tubes present their own problems because the way the striations go, the way it's printed, it went like this. The printer went, and I'm kind of torn. I'm going to throw this at you as an idea and let you take out of it what you will. This is a primitive, and I use the word lightly, a primitive starship. This is early man's exploration type of thing. So you could be forgiven if it's not all bright, shiny, and happy, and even panels and smooth hulls and all of that, as later starships would be. It's made out of rougher materials. It's from a rougher, more frontierish type time. So I am not 100% against these details or these striations showing up. I think it makes the material look a little bit more rustic, a little bit more primitive. So I don't really have a problem with it. I do want to minimize it. I don't want all of these lines showing up. But if some of them do at the end of the day, I'm not going to cry salty tears about it because, again, I think it's part of what the starships would have been made of in that time. I can live with it. I can justify it. Maybe that's the right term. I can justify it. So yes, I'm going to try to smooth this out as much as possible, but I'm not going to try to shoot for something that is a smooth, gleaming hull like you would get in later iterations of starships. Now, and I'm going to say this with all of the kind, loving respect I can muster, and that is this technique or this finish is not going to work for all situations. You can justify it in the primitiveness of this starship design and the era that it was made and all that, creative writing that you want to do in your own head. But this would not serve, this finish, this look would not serve later starships well. It would not, it'd be hard to justify this look on a Galaxy class ship or whatever. So we do need to figure out what we can do to minimize this texture. But if we don't completely eliminate it on this particular era of ship, I'm not going to call that a deal breaker. So that's my ever evolving rationale for this, and I hope you can follow along with that. But now that this has been dried in overnight and sanded, it's time for another round of primers on it to see how much I can minimize the look. Good morning, it's Wednesday, folks, and we're back at the Horizon, and I want to do a little bit of A and B comparison, since I've got two nearly identical parts, both printed by Jack at on the same machine using the same materials, about as close as you can get. Now, he made some changes and tweaks to the file, obviously, between the two of these. This is the second version that's got this secondary rod here, and he's tweaked the sizes of some elements, but that's not why we're here. I want to share the two different methods of dealing with the 3D material, and this is using that coating. I used the clear coating, and then I put a layer of, or I just sprayed it with a primer because the coating was really glossy and it made it hard to photograph. So this is the original piece with brush on coating, and you let that dry, and then I put a clear primer. This is what I've been working on this week, which is just multiple coats of primer and sanding in between. Each of them have their pluses and their minuses. This is, to my eye, a lot smoother and a lot less of the printing pattern, but you lose detail because it's a thick coat that you end up putting on it. It does the job of filling in between the striations of the 3D printing, but you start to suffer on detail. Case in point, the softness of these two ridges right here. You can see this where it starts to get soft. Now, granted, I am really zooming in on things, and that's probably not the fairest of comparisons, but look at the same detail on this part. I'm sorry, flip it around. The same detail on this part, you can see, is a lot crisper. Now, what the trade-off is, I am still seeing a lot of printing texture, and this has had, I mean, I've unleashed almost a whole can of primer on the kit, not just on this part, but on the kit, and I'm, I think it's about as smooth as it's going to get. So the answer obviously would be this, but if it were, about half as thick, a diluted version of this would be the best answer. This I really like because you're still seeing the detail on it, but I still am not getting rid of a lot of the patterning that I wish I could get rid of. Now, it's easier on some of the wide open spaces, like on the ball here, to sand it down and really, finesse it. But when you're trying to sand in and around shapes like that, you can't get in and around those shapes with a sanding stick in the same respect that you can on these wide open spaces. It's tougher to sand in between there than it is here. Whereas you can paint that fluid on here and get it all over everything. So that, to me, is an advantage, because you can cover this, but you can't, you can cover this, but you can't sand all of that. And that's where I'm coming down on this. On the wide open spaces, I really like the primer and sanding routine. Like here, this looks very nice. I'm very happy with that. But if you're trying to get in and around detail, you cannot sand it down to the same level. It's kind of like, you have to forgive me because I watch a lot of home improvement shows. It's kind of like, excuse me, when you're sanding a floor to refinish a wood floor. You can use the big open sander and run it across the the expansive floor, but when you're trying to get into the corners, you've got to use that tiny little hand sander, and you don't always get it quite as clean or quite as sanded as you do if you're using the big machine in the middle of the floor. And you could say the same thing about, mowing the grass. If you use a big mower out in the middle of the yard, and then you have to come in around and get a weed eater out and trim around your driveways and stuff around the house, it's difficult to get into all of those nooks and crannies and have it look the same smooth, even cut as the rest of your yard. And that's the analogies I will bring to play here, because just like I can sand all of this with a wide open sander and sandpaper, it is tough to get in to these details here when you get to about that far in. It's just tough to sand it, and I don't know if that's enough to, color your ideas of working with 3D printing or not. This is still the idea that you would be able to get this kit is still a marvelous thing, because some of these niche subjects are never going to see a styrene release. You can live your whole life and deal with that fact that you're never going to see a Deadalus class in styrene from round 2. Just ain't going to happen. And is this better than a resin kit? Well, resin kits, they have their own issues. Now, resin kits don't have a pattern on us. I guess the perfect world would be to make a perfect one of these, sand it to within an inch of its life, and then mold it and make resin castings. But then you're back to the problem of working with resins, where the inside and the outside of the pieces aren't always uniform. It's tough to drill out a lot of holes, and it would be tough to cast this in resin because of all of the compound angles. So 3D is, I still think, going to be the future of garage kit building. I just don't know if we're there yet on the resolution of the materials. For a homegrown printer, this is darn good. This is made on a Prusa, which is like top of the line home printing, 3D printing. It's the actual Prusa, not the many knockoffs of that same design that are sold under other names. Whether or not the resolution of the filament is quite there yet or not, I'm still up in the air about. This is getting to the point where I'm ready to stop futzing with the texture and start building it. And then once we put our final top coats of paint on there, it might take away all of the problems that I'm having, because I think I want to use the same paint that I used on my big Enterprise, and that is because I got some left over, and that's an enamel paint, and that will fill in some of the problem areas too. So am I overreacting? I don't know. I'm trying to give Jack his money's worth as far as giving a good critical review of the material, and see whether the material is going to hold the promise that I hope that it does for these things continued in the future, and then we can determine from that what things might need to be changed in the design. Excuse me, the design of such that making the printing easier, and then making it easier for the user on the other end of the spectrum, as far as when he gets the material, what to do with it and how to get satisfactory results. I'm sorry to keep rambling on this, but this is the nature of this build, is evaluating this material as a viable model making, I don't know what the word is, a viable avenue for model making. Or is it better left to just using for add-on parts to existing kits? This is the first kit, like I've said, that I've built that is completely out of 3D printed parts. There are no stock parts in this at all. So let's get on with it. Morning, it's Thursday. It's gateway to the weekend, and after yesterday's completely crappy weather, rainy, miserable, cold, ugly, today a little bit better. It's turned quite nippy out this morning, and there goes the phone. All right, I'm back. I just had to hang up on somebody. The weather turned a little bit nicer today, so I think what it allowed me to do yesterday was put yet another coat of paint primer on these parts. And today I've said enough is enough. I'm going to build with what I've got. And I think today I'm going to try to put an enamel coat over the top of these parts and see if that's going to help mitigate some of the texture that's in here. I've also investigated the circuit board. Now, I bought this card at the same time as I bought the Yamato lighting. I just made an order of two Madman lighting sets, and this is actually the board that the Yamato instructions showed, with this little speed controller thing here. That wasn't on the Yamato one. They had rewired that area for the I'm sorry, getting in camera, for the wave motion gun. So this actually works as it's supposed to by stepping down the blinks. There is a strobe circuit, a blinker circuit, and two constant ons. And one of the constant ons obviously would be for the windows, but the other is for these old lighting circuits that I've had for years. And they're just the perfect size to go in the nacelles. I scrapped them out of my scrap box, but it has, these circuits here have no resistors on them. So I don't want to dare put 9 volts through that. It works just fine on 3 volts. I'm afraid I'll burn it out if I put 9 volts on it. So I'm going to have to go through the magic resistor box and see if I can find something appropriate to put on that. Okay, I'm getting ready to put a coat of paint on yon Horizon parts. And to do that, I am pulling out my old friend, the Enterprise paint. And this is the auto paint that I had made up, I didn't make it up, I had it made up by the kind people at the auto paint store to paint the Enterprise. So I've got some left. I'm hoping that its enamel properties will help fill in some of the grooves on the 3D printed parts. But this is the old 6:1 ratio stuff, so I need to mix that all into a little brush because I don't feel like I need to do up a whole mass of it. I'm going to be putting it in the regular small airbrush and shooting it on those parts. So if I make up an ounce of this, I think I'll be good. So I just need to get some eyedroppers out or some pipettes and carefully count out drops of paint. And it's going to be monotonous and boring, and I don't need to include you in it. Okay, I've got my paint mixed up. It's basically 120 drops of that and 20 and 20, which is my 6:1 ratio. So I'm ready to mix it up, throw it in the brush, and I got a limited amount of time, so I got to put the gloves on, the mask on, open up the window, turn on the exhaust fan, and get to cracking. Okay, the parts are all hanging to dry. The brushes have been cleaned out. My hands have been cleaned off. That enamel paint just gets everywhere, and you want to do it as compactly as possible. That means you want to have everything ready, get all the paint ready to go, spray everything, and then leave it to dry, and then clean out your brushes as soon as possible, because you want to minimize the amount of time that enamel paint is sitting in your airbrush. So I cleaned up my brush before I picked up the camera. So this is all hanging to dry. I will leave this overnight and come back to it in the morning. Good morning, folks. It's Friday. It's the last work day of the week, and I've got great news. Great news. The enamel coat that I put on yesterday has dried to a rock-hard shell. And look how beauteous that turned out. Now, of course, the more you sand, the more you prepare the surface underneath, the better result you're going to get. But for as many coats as I put on there of primer and sanding, that is pretty darn spiffy. Now, I can see all of the lines because I know they're there. And you probably can too. There's, I don't think, a way to get completely 100% away from that. Like I said, you can sand the bigger areas, but you're still going to see patterns in the places you can't get a sanding stick or sandpaper into. So you're just going to have to learn to live with the beast, I think. But I was so delighted with the results that I went straight ahead into putting in the windows with the Testors window maker, clear part cement window maker. And I think they're turning out nicely now. Of course, they're better when there's a light shining on it. They look kind of milky. They're not very clear. But, you know, I'm not really expecting them to be clear. I expect them to be lit up once I put a light source in them. So they're going to look like that. And I got to tell you that the 3D material, this I don't know whether it's PLA or what exactly it is. I'm a novice on that, so I will just say the printed plastic provides a very good light block. Of course, all the coats of paint I've put on top of it don't hurt, but you get very good light block. And to me, the test for good light blocking is how well does it block between windows where you don't have a lot of material. And those windows are nice and individual. And now I know you're seeing the gloss, and the gloss is going to be there because that's the enamel paint. And we ran into the same problem on Enterprise, and I already know that once I put the flat coat over top of that, that's going to go away. So I'm not seeing that in my mind's eye on my final result. But I know it's kind of hard to look past at this point. Here we can kind of see what I was talking about earlier about the more detail a single piece has, the harder it is to get in and around and sand everything. Were I to have Jack's here for a minute, I would probably tell him or put an idea in his head to make more parts, but simpler parts. Yeah, it's tempting to print the whole thing all at once and be done with it because your printer can do that. But I still think like a model maker, and I would like to have seen maybe this whole point here be a separate piece that was inserted from the inside. That way I could have gotten in there and sanded a little bit better. I would have rather seen that a flat disc with details that I could apply to it and therefore be able to sand around them. Like these guys here, I would rather have applied to the surface rather than them being integrated. Now I know the whole idea of these and these raised lines is print it all at once because you don't want to try to stick the detail down on this. And this is easier to get around because it's only going in one direction. The raised details only go in one direction, and it's kind of easier to sand up to them. Here, where the raised details are in two directions, it's a little bit more difficult because you have to try to sand up into those corners. But look at that. I think that is turning out quite nicely now. I've gone ahead and filled in the windows. See if I shine a light in there. Let me see if I can grab this by one hand. Shine a light in there. You can see the light coming through the windows. And that is, it's still fresh. So hopefully that will dry a little clearer. But, and then once you put in a couple of coats of windows on the outside, you can just go in on the inside and just fill those pockets back in. And don't have to worry about being too clean about it. But now that I've got the window cockpit or the window canopy window maker, the clear canopy glue in there, to do any more painting on top of this, I'm going to have to put masks over those windows, which I was completely intending on doing. But I really think we're in a healthy position now to where I can start thinking about how to integrate the lighting kit into this. It's going to be fun. It's going to be interesting. Okay, I've hit on something that's kind of bumming me out. Maybe it's because I'm being too impatient. But anytime I put a light into this ball, the windows come out very yellow. And that's a warm... even if I put a very cool bulb in there, it still comes out very warm. And that is the color of the window. This what is supposed to be clear window canopy glue. It's coming out very yellow, and I'm wondering if it's because I have not let it dry sufficiently. So what I'm doing now is I'm stepping away and letting things dry. This glue, it dries much slower than other adhesives, so I'm finding that I'm sticking my meaty thumb into it instead of letting it dry, and that's not good. So playing around with other pieces, trying to put some paint on them, seeing how well this is going to take it. Like into there. Now, yes, and I've said this before, and I'll repeat myself, this gloss will not stand. But that was the nature of the paint. So once it is flattened, it will look so much better. So what I need to do now is that hardest of all things, which is to step away for a while. All right, I can think of no better example to show you than this right here. If you can see what the difference is between a flat coat and the paint as it came out of the sprayer. And it makes all the difference in the world. You can see this high gloss and all of that. But as soon as you hit it with a flat coat, obviously the gloss goes away, but it becomes a much more interesting color. It doesn't look like a toy. And that's what I'm going, because basically the gloss was getting to be a bit of a distraction. So I just hit it with a quick flat coat, and I'll gloss back over it before I put the decals down. But it's going to be easier for me to put the grays in here because I want to spray in some tones and some shades that that will be easier. They'll stick easier to that than they will to this. To the enamel. The enamel served an important purpose, and that was to get it filled in some of the cracks, filled in some of that tone, some of the texture. That was the important thing that it did. We're getting late into Friday afternoon, so I want to put something showy together to have something to end the week on a high note with. So let's do this. I need to solder up some wiring first, but let me take care of that, and I'll be right back at you. Okay, so I'm starting to get the wiring in, and this is where I wanted to finish up for today and kind of have something to show. It is the cell circuits are hooked up, and you see the strobe circuit hooked up here, and of course that'll all be continued out the rest of the ship, but you got to start somewhere. And this is where I've started on that. Oops, and see, everything is very tenuously sitting here with wires touching like they ought not to. So there you go. It's actually easier to see. It's easier to see these guys, the actual circuit in it, on the camera, seeing the rotation on it. And yeah, what you're seeing is right. I actually went outwards with both of these, as opposed to traditional nacelles turn inward towards each other. I'm actually turning those outwards. And the strobe on the top. So that's where we're gonna end it for today, I think. Okay, one last thing. I lied. I thought I was done, but I wasn't. Wanted to light up the dome, and this is your planetary sensor underneath. There you can see the difference between the clear or the translucent printed piece and the yellow windows that you're getting from the glue. I don't know if there's any way around that. I hate to think that I'm going to have to clean all those out and redo them with something else. But, and I hate using this phrase because I think it's a cop-out, it is what it is. There you go. Very nice. Now I don't have the circuit hooked up, or else you'd see the strobe and then the cells going. And this looks like where we're going to be finishing up week 1 of the Horizon build. It's taken a long road to get from there to here, to paraphrase, but we are finally to the point where we would probably be starting on a basic styrene kit. There's a lot of prep to get it to this point. And learned a lot about using or working with 3D printed parts, again, to get to this point. A lot of sanding, sanding and priming and sanding and priming. That seems to be the best way to go, although I really do like how the clear parts turned out when you put that brush on material over it. Something else I discovered that was a bit interesting, just taking apart and doing a simple wipe down with some acetone. That did a lot. That actually, it knocks off the glossy finish. I can't say that it takes away too much detail, but it does help in getting some of the patterning to go away. So that's something else to think about. But like I said, now I'm kind of to the point where I would be if I were starting a regular kit. These windows aren't going to be an issue. Something I wasn't planning on was that the glue would not cure clear, that it's curing it's the yellowish haze to it. But I'm going to let this go over the weekend and come back to it Monday and see if it's dried up any more. Maybe it just needs more drying time to completely cure. But that's going to do it for this week. I should be able to wrap this up next week pretty easily. So until then, be good to each other. Don't leave your communicator laying around where some easily adaptable society can find it. And we'll catch you here next time.